Back in January, I got a surprising update from my Whoop. It was my yearly review, and in that review, I discovered that I was in the top 1% of all Whoop users for my sleep performance. Now, users of the Whoop are probably on the healthier side of the population. By my guess, that probably puts me in the top 1% in the world, or maybe even better. Now, I'm not saying this to brag, because to give this some context, I want to tell you what my sleep used to be like. My sleep used to be pretty shocking. I'd eat a late meal and have half a bottle of wine about 10 minutes before bed. And I used to think drinking that wine was the only thing that would get me to sleep. I get consistent, really bad, disrupted sleep, and this was before we even had children. Every day felt like a struggle, and I'd need coffee and snacks in order to keep on going and actually stay awake. This was a cycle that lasted for years. Then we had our daughter and things got even worse. The drinking stopped, but the late night eating continued. And then we had to contend with waking up throughout the night in order to deal with our baby. After literally years, we finally got her to sleep through the night at about the age of 4. And me and Laura got to have a full, peaceful night of sleep at last. And then in a matter of weeks later, our son was born and we had another baby to deal with, and the cycle started all over again. On our journey to becoming healthier, reading about and understanding sleep became really important. I'd read enough scary statistics to give me the nudge to try and finally make a change. At that time, change seemed like it wouldn't be possible, but it actually turned out to be easier than I thought. This is exactly what I did in order to become a top 1% sleeper. The first thing I needed to do was to actually properly track my sleep in order to see just how bad it was. Now, I use Whoop. This isn't a sponsored video. I'm not sponsored by Whoop. Other sleep and fitness trackers are available that do the same sort of job. I had heard lots of good things about the Whoop from lots of other people, and after having a trial and being impressed, I decided to take the plunge and invest in myself by paying for an annual subscription. This immediately gave me some accountability to myself, and I committed and made the investment, so in my head I had to now do the work to justify the cost. Those few weeks wearing the Whoop were a shit show. I had poor sleep and I had awful recoveries, and immediate patterns started to emerge that showed me just how badly my late night eating habits were affecting my sleep. I woke up feeling like crap for years, but when I actually started seeing the numbers, I could feel the difference between those red and yellow recoveries. I really felt more alive when I had a green recovery, and a red recovery genuinely made me feel like I didn't want to do anything, and it made me really susceptible to like leaving the house to try and buy some sort of junk food. My bedtime used to be any time at all, normally midnight or after, but having our daughter changed all that. We learned quickly that it would no longer be possible to function at all going to bed at our old time, so we started going to bed earlier to catch up on some sleep. And knowing we'd have to get up early for that 5 o'clock feed. Those bedtime habits are sort of stuck, and it gave me an immediate advantage when I started using the Whoop, because my bedtimes haven't really had to change. I go to bed for around 9:15 to 9:30, and my sleep usually starts between 9:30 and 10 p.m. I wake up usually between 6 and 6:15. So I get around 7.5 hours of sleep each night. When I first started going to bed earlier, I would feel like I was missing out. All those hours I'd normally be watching TV and lounging around. Now I couldn't do any of that, and I had to go to sleep instead. But I kind of had it all wrong, because I now have more time in the mornings to do the things that I want to do. And for me, extra time in the evenings usually means TV or scrolling. But extra time in the mornings means productive with our house renovation project, getting an early start on work, or reading. I don't miss that TV time. The thought of doing that now seems like something I don't want to do at all. Late night eating and even just one beer had a really bad impact on my sleep. In fact, it destroyed it. It created a cycle of feeling like crap and just wanting to do it again every night. Seeing a good result and feeling good made me really want to stop the bad habit. This bit wasn't so easy, but I do have a few tips that helped me. We had a few nights with a bit of alcohol, and that stopped pretty easily, but we did have to switch the alcohol for a few weeks in order to make it feel like we weren't depriving ourselves. So we had kombucha instead, which, if you've never tried, is a really nice alternative and a way of cutting down on alcohol. The late night eating went from being every night to a couple of nights, and eventually it was cut altogether. Now, I'm not perfect still. A hard day or some sort of other excuse, like a course or celebration, occasionally has me eating later than I should. But now, rather than having a whole big meal or a pizza, I usually have a piece of sourdough toast. Now, even though it's just a piece of sourdough toast at 7 o'clock, the result is still a far worse sleep score. Only recently, I wrecked an 8-day green streak by having just one piece of sourdough, and almost every time I do this, it results in a yellow recovery. We now mainly eat our last meal of the day between 4 and 4:30. Now that probably sounds really early to a lot of people, but it works for us as a family. We're quite lucky that we can spend each evening together eating at the table, and even the children are absolutely fine with that being their last meal time of the day. I found that in the past I'd need a snack in order to keep me going for that final hour before tea, but it turns out I was just hungry. So instead of the snack, I just started eating my final meal of the day a bit earlier, and I'm not really hungry that much afterwards. And that meal time gives me a great 5-hour fasting time before going to bed to ensure that my body can focus on sleep rather than be still trying to digest my last meal. Now, Whoop tracks your resting heart rate and heart rate variability. These are two metrics that I look at closely. The lower that resting heart rate is and the better the HRV is, the better your sleep and recovery. Now, I love data. Here are some of my stats from my Whoop. My HRV used to hover around the high 30s to mid 40s. This suddenly shot up to the high 40s to high 50s after joining the gym and starting to really exercise properly. Recently, my HRV has been hovering around the 51 and 52 mark, but it's always higher after reeling in any bad habits, and it always takes a hit if I have that piece of sourdough or I have a day eating a large volume of carby foods. I did keto back in January, and that was my best average HRV. My resting heart rate dropped from the low 60s all the way down to between 49 and 51. Any day I eat sugar impacts this, and any day when I have minimal carbs, I have a good resting heart rate. My lowest ever resting heart rate has been 45. And getting my heart rate that low always leads to a great night's sleep, and my good resting heart rates are usually caused by a good day of healthy eating, minimal carbs, and some exercise, as well as going to bed fasted. Now, some of the behaviours that I track that lead to the biggest improvements in my recovery score are going to the gym early. Now, I only go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week for just over an hour at about 9 o'clock in the morning, so nothing too crazy. And doing keto always gives me a better result. Now, the things that I do that lead to the biggest negative results on my recovery come from eating carbs, eating added sugar, and eating a late meal gives me the worst impact by far. I still watch TV and look at my phone right before bedtime, which a lot of people say that you shouldn't do. But we did start lowering the light levels in our house at around 6 o'clock. We ditched our lamps in our bedroom, and I now use a small book light in order to read just before I go to sleep. I don't have any caffeine after 12 o'clock. I tend to not have any at all after 8 o'clock in the morning, but sometimes I just need that morning perk up. Any caffeine close to bedtime literally destroys your sleep. And if you look at the studies on this, they're pretty scary and were a great way of motivating me to want to stop having caffeine all day, like I used to. Plus, I found as soon as I really started sorting out my sleep, I didn't even need the caffeine as much anymore. I now mainly drink decaf, and there is no difference at all in the taste. It probably has a bit of a placebo effect on me as well. My last drink of any fluid at all happens around 4 hours before I go to bed. Occasionally, I will have a drink of water or decaf coffee after we put the children to bed if I'm really thirsty, but that tends to always lead to me getting up in the night, and it disrupts my sleep and knocks down my sleep score. We still get disrupted by the children in the night, especially our 2-year-old son, but by cutting down the late night habits and focusing on decent bedtimes, our ability to deal with being woken up and getting him settled again is much better, and we can still get a good night's sleep even though we've been disturbed. If I have that late night indulgence, it leads to me not being able to settle, and in rare instances I have to get up at like 3 o'clock in the morning because I just cannot get back to sleep. So it ends up destroying my entire day. That's literally all it took for me to become a top 1% sleeper. I don't feel like I made any sacrifices. In fact, I feel like it's the complete opposite. I feel like I'm able to achieve more each day, I respond better, and I'm able to deal with the children better, and when I do set myself a task, I'm more productive than I used to be. And I make better food choices on a day with good sleep. Plus, according to studies and science, I'm adding potentially years onto my life expectancy. Your day doesn't start with that morning routine. Your day actually starts with your evening routine the day before.